Toddler travel adventures. 13 years ago, me, my husband and my then 3-year-old son were traveling by plane to visit some family for Christmas. I had booked the tickets through a third-party vendor like Expedia or Kayak, instead of through the airline directly. When I booked, I selected seat assignments. This is before the airlines charged for that, and entered the names and birthdays of my family, as required. The first flight went as fine as it can go traveling with a toddler. But before we landed, I was looking at the boarding passes for the second flight and noticed that we weren't seated in the seats I picked. Instead, we were in 3 separate parts of the plane, something like seats 17A, 24C and 28B. So when we landed, I went to talk to the nearest gate agent, and after I handed her the boarding passes, the conversation went something like this. "Excuse me, there's an issue with our seats. These aren't the seats I select." Gate agent cutting me off in a very unfriendly tone. "Well, you shouldn't have booked with a third-party vendor. You should have booked with the airline directly. The airline doesn't have to honor the seat assignments." "Yes, but there's going to be a problem because..." Cutting me off again. "Well, I can't do anything about it. You're just going to have to sit in the seats we assigned you." "But you see, I can't help you. It's just a 1-hour flight. You can sit in your assigned seats." Me in a super, over-the-top friendly voice with only the slightest hint of snark. "Sure, no problem. We can sit separately. It's going to be a really interesting flight for everyone on the plane, with my 3-year-old sitting by himself, surrounded by strangers." And I turned to walk away. In a panicked voice, Ma'am, can you come back to the desk please?" And amazingly, she found 2 seats next to each other in about 5 seconds after that. Thus the sanity of an entire flight of people was saved from hearing a toddler meltdown. This happened to me with Toddler. No one would help me. Got on the plane and it's full of business people. I told the flight attendant what was going on. She asked if anyone was willing to trade seats with me, but no takers. Flight attendant told, "Don't worry, just trust her." I said fine, sat my son down, buckled his seatbelt, then went to find my seat. Flight attendant just smiled as we walked away. Within 30 seconds my son was screaming and everyone around him suddenly volunteered to change seats with me. This happened to us with our 5-year-old. The airline refused to put us together and a passenger 2 seats down refused to change seats. Same seat, different aisle. Well, I sat my kid right next to the guy. Kid started to scream, so I told him to go right ahead and cry that I couldn't do anything. Lol. 10 seconds later the guy was ready to swap seats. Yeah. I want to say the FAA recently adopted new regulations to stop airlines from pulling shenanigans like these. Parents need to be seated by their young children on a flight, at least 10 and under. If the age has been entered when the ticket was purchased, there is no excuse for seating young kids away from the adults in the group. Forgot to finish my sentence. We had that happen when we were going on a cruise about 20 years ago. The cruise line booked our flights, and we had seats all over the plane with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, 4 different locations. The staff at the desk at the gate refused to do anything and said we had to do it on the plane. The flight attendants also refused to help. We ended up getting 2 nice people to trade seats with us, so we could get 2 and 2, my wife with 1 kid, me with the other. When we got off the flight, one of the people we traded with, also booked by the cruise line, thanked us because they got to sit by their people. Would have been much less stressful had they just agreed to do that at the gate. Wish that I had just said, "Okay, let the 1-year-old and 3-year-old sit separate from us." BTDT. Except the gate agent wouldn't budge even after I explained my 4-year-old would be sitting by himself. So I very calmly said, "Fine. I understand you can't help me. But if that little boy, and I pointed to my son sitting nearby, has a meltdown, and I'm sure he will because he's 4 and very attached to me, I will make sure every single person on that plane knows that I asked the gate agent for help to solve the situation and I made a point to look at his name tag. Bill refused to help me. I will also hold you responsible if anything happens to him on this flight. He called me back to the desk about 10 minutes later with new seat assignments. I was in my early 20s, single and used to being pushed around, but I snapped that day. That seating is so dangerous in the event of an airborne incident or evacuation. What parent would calmly get off a plane and let their 3-year-old find their own way off? I certainly wouldn't. I would be literally kicking us to get to them and get them to safety regardless of any evacuation plans. Just think of the chaos that would cause. Ahaha, my mom did this on a flight many years back. She was traveling with Misa Toddler to go visit her parents. And somehow it ended up that we were booked for 2 very far apart seats. Mom asked the people sitting by the one seat if they would be willing to switch. They said no. So she went down to the other seat, which was between an elderly couple. She asked if they would switch, and they also said no. Oh, okay. Well, here's the activity bag and snacks for my 2-year-old. Thanks for babysitting. I could really use a nap myself. Quote. They very quickly agreed to a switch after that. LMAO. Some airlines are just a-holes. I flew an international flight where they seated me, my 2-year-old and 4-year-old separately. Was able to get them eventually to move 2 seats together. But one of my kids ended up sitting next to a very nice Korean lady and her toddler the entire flight. She said she was thinking of having a second child and that this would be good experience. My child is very well behaved. I did run back and forth to check, but I'm pretty sure by the end of the flight she had reconsidered. Unfortunately, not the only time I had these problems with that airline. For the number of times you hear these gate agents say, "I can't help you," like it is a Pavlovian response, makes me think it's in their training manual. I can't count the number of times I have booked a specific seat on an airline and then paid extra for it only to have them send me a text on my way to the airport telling me they changed my seat. Really? My grandpa was a pilot for years. He was also a man I wouldn't cross in any significant way. Whichever flight attendant split a parent and child better be prepared to explain to that man why they thought he'd want a screaming child on his plane. He was known for telling the stewardesses to tear a small corner off of a sugar packet to give to the babies to suck on so they'd pop their ears and stop crying. Mom power. What would have been truly malicious would have been to accept the seat assignments and let the whole plane deal with your 3-year-old. Except that would have been massively unfair to the poor kid. My 3-year-old would love that. Happened to us on the way back from our Disney vacation. Airline moved us from our previously paid extra for 5 seats. Hubby, me, and 3 boys ages 8, 6, 4 because there was another group of like 12. All ages 13 plus, that wanted to be together. I emphasized to the gate agent that hey, we paid extra to ensure we are together, especially because we are in the going home part of the Disney vacation. She asked the guy in charge of the large group and he threw a fit that I was requesting he move anyone in his party. Blah blah. Ended up I was across the aisle from my 8 and 4-year-old. Hubby was about 6 rows in front with the 6-year-old. And we were in the only aisle without working in-flight entertainment in the entire plane. Kids were exhausted after a full week at Disney and kinda cranky. The guy who was in charge of the other group ended up next to my 2 kids. and made several very snarky comments about how they better be on their best behavior or else, to which my exhausted and slightly pissed off self replied, "I've offered to swap seats with you multiple times. I'm making you one final offer. Will you switch seats with me so that I can sit by my kids?" He said for $500 cash he would switch. Flight attendants saw the entire exchange, so I leaned across the aisle, handed my 8-year-old the iPad and said, "Y'all don't fight too loudly. Try not to spill your drinks on this man," and put in my handphones and read a book for the 2.5-hour flight home. Guy was literally punching my arm. Left a bruise. To get my attention to tell me my kids were annoying him because they were watching a movie he thought was stupid. I told him he had his chance to move. He chose to play stupid games and he won a stupid prize. My kids were kinda sniping at each other. Headphones weren't actually on. It was for visual effect. Only the kids were cranky and exhausted but behaving reasonably well. And if he touched me again he would served with a lawsuit because my attorney husband was sitting several rows up and could see and hear the entire interaction. At which point hubby obliged me by turning around and waving at me, pantomiming for me to take out my headphones and make sure I was okay since I had been punched repeatedly. Then when we landed, I had to carry my youngest because he was snoring. And somehow all 5 of our bags were at the back of the plane. And the guy lost it on me because he wanted off the plane right this damn second. In what was again not my most mature moment of my life, I told he that he was welcome to get off but was going to be required to carry either my 2 kids or the 5 suitcases. His choice. Or he could hand me $500 for my trouble and inconvenience. No connecting flight. Just was ready to get off the plane. The fact that I kept a straight face for the entire interaction still makes me giggle. I'm fully aware I was the in this case, but it was a glorious case of screw around with a pissed off mama bear and get your ass handed to you. Also, AA now has a note on my file that my children are always to be seated with me. And I don't have to pay extra to have that guaranteed. Sounds like your flight attendants just volunteered to be babysitters. Amazing. I wonder if they know about that. I'll be sure to mention to them how this came to be when they inevitably ask. We had the exact same thing happen. Except that we had booked through the airline. But due to their flight delays, they rebooked us. More than 1 kid, though, but all under 4. It's never a problem until it's their problem, is it? How hard is it to listen before saying, "I can't help you"? Once in a while you may learn you can. A flight attendant told me that if people won't move, buckle the kid and just hand them a vomit bag. And say they will need more and walk away. She said it worked every time. I have been lucky this hasn't happened to me, and my kids are 16 and 21. Sometimes I wish they'd separate us. I have been on the receiving end of this. I have very broad shoulders. I always pay for an aisle seat. If I don't, my shoulders will be in your shoulder. At least with an aisle I can just stick out a bit. Get on and get seated, and a woman with a toddler comes on board and wants me to move because she has 2 middle seats way across the plan for her and the child. I refuse. The other 3 people refuse. Eventually I get told to move by a flight attendant. I was livid that entire flight. 2+ hours if recall. Fuck United. That is always the guaranteed method of compliance. I have used it myself in the past, sure. My 4-year-old or 6-year-old hyperactive child would love to sit with a couple strangers. Funny how fast seats are found.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.